Ryan Clark stood in the center of the massive hall that served as the Galactic Council chambers. The room was built from some kind of living crystal that the aliens had grown rather than carved. It glowed with a soft blue light that hurt human eyes if you looked at it too long. Ryan had been looking at it for 30 years now, and his eyes still watered. The chamber was huge, beyond anything humans had built back on Earth. It could hold representatives from over 300 different alien species, though today only about 50 were present. Most of the empty seats belonged to the smaller species that the Council barely acknowledged. The big powers sat in the front rows where everyone could see them. Ryan adjusted his formal diplomatic uniform and checked the time display on his wrist. Device. The translator implant behind his ear hummed quietly as it prepared to convert his words into the hundreds of different languages the Council used. He had practiced this speech in his quarters aboard the human diplomatic ship for weeks. Every word had been chosen carefully. The Altarian representative, Counselor Vextara, sat in the front row reading something on her datapad. She had 4 eyes arranged around her crystalline head and usually kept at least 2 of them focused on whatever she was reading rather than paying attention to whoever was speaking. The humans had learned over the years that this was not rudeness by Altarian standards, just efficiency. Behind her sat General Kovros of the Grenthak Empire. He was nearly 3 meters tall and had to use a special breathing device to survive. In the station's atmosphere, the Grenthak were warriors by nature and had built the largest military force in known space. They treated most other species with barely concealed contempt, but they were especially dismissive of humans who they considered too weak to be proper soldiers. The Zephyrian trade representative, Ambassador Quillen, was actually paying attention to Ryan as he prepared to speak. The Zephyrians looked almost human except for their pale green skin and complete lack of hair. They were traders and negotiators who had made contact with humanity shortly after first contact 50 years ago. They had been polite to humans but had never offered them any real trading partnerships. Ryan cleared his throat and began to speak. The chamber's acoustics carried his voice clearly to every corner of the vast space. "Distinguished members of the Galactic Council," he said, using the formal opening that protocol required. "I appear before you today as the official representative of the Terran Federation and all human colonies within Council space." A few alien heads turned in his direction, but most continued with whatever they had been doing. Ryan had expected this. Human representatives were generally ignored unless they were reporting on some minor administrative matter. The Council had classified humanity as a Class 7 civilization, which meant they were considered barely advanced enough to safely use faster-than-light travel. "The Terran Federation has reached a decision regarding our continued membership in this council," Ryan continued. "After careful consideration by our government and our people, we have decided to formally withdraw from the Galactic Council effective immediately." This time more heads turned, not because they were shocked or concerned, but because withdrawal was unusual enough to be mildly interesting. Most species that joined the Council stayed even if they had no real influence. The benefits of access to galactic trade routes and protection from hostile forces were usually worth the cost of being ignored by the major powers. Counselor Vextara finally looked up from her datapad with 2 of her 4 eyes. She seemed to be waiting for Ryan to explain why humanity was making such an obviously poor decision. The Altarians were practical people who rarely did anything without a clear benefit. General Kovras made a sound that the translator interpreted as amusement. The Grenthak had probably been expecting humans to withdraw eventually. In their view, species that could not contribute meaningful military strength were just taking up space in the council chambers. Ryan reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, crystal data storage device. He walked to the center podium where speakers traditionally left any formal documents they wanted to present to the council. The podium was sized for the average alien height, which meant Ryan had to reach up slightly to place the crystal in the reception slot. This device contains our formal withdrawal notification along with a complete transfer of authority for all human installations, research projects, and defensive positions currently operating in council space, Ryan said. We will complete our withdrawal within one standard galactic year. He paused for a moment, looking around the chamber at the various alien representatives. Most were already losing interest and returning to their previous activities. A few seemed to be calculating how quickly they could claim whatever resources humanity was abandoning. We thank the Council for the opportunity to observe and learn from galactic civilization over the past 50 years. Ryan continued, the experience has been educational in ways we did not expect when we first requested membership. That last comment was carefully worded. Humanity had indeed learned a great deal during their time in the Council, though not in the way the aliens assumed. Every piece of technology humans had been allowed to observe, every scientific principle they had been permitted to study, every military technique they had witnessed during joint operations had been carefully recorded and analyzed. The Council species had been happy to let humans do manual labor and basic manufacturing work. They had been willing to share simple technologies that were decades behind their own current capabilities. They had allowed human scientists to work as assistants on research projects. What they had not realized was that humans were extremely good at learning from incomplete information. Ryan nodded politely to the chamber and turned to leave. Behind him, the Council was already moving on to the next item on their agenda, which appeared to be a dispute over mining rights in some distant star system. No one called out to ask questions about the human withdrawal. No one requested clarification about the timeline or the transfer of facilities. As he walked toward the exit, Ryan could hear Ambassador Quillen discussing with another representative how quickly the Zephyrians could take control of the human mining operations in the asteroid belt around Vega. The operations were small by galactic standards, but they had been profitable enough to cover the costs of human membership in the Council. Ryan stepped into the corridor outside the chamber and activated his communication device. Fleet Admiral Lisa Grant was waiting aboard the human escort ship Aurora in the station's docking bay. Admiral Grant, this is Ambassador Clark, he said quietly. The formal notification has been delivered. You may begin Phase 1 of the withdrawal. Understood, Ambassador, came the reply. Captain Morrison reports all ships are ready for departure on your signal. Ryan walked through the corridors of Kepler Station toward the docking bay. The station was neutral territory administered by the Council itself rather than any single species. It served as the diplomatic and administrative center for galactic government such as it was. The major powers cooperated when it served their interests and competed when it did not. Humans had maintained a small embassy on Kepler Station for 50 years. The facility was modest compared to the massive complexes operated by the Altarians or the Grenthak, but it had served its purpose. More importantly, it had given humans a place to observe how the galactic powers actually operated behind their public diplomatic facade. Captain Jake Morrison was waiting at the airlock to the Aurora when Ryan arrived. Morrison had been commanding human diplomatic missions for over 20 years and had developed a reputation among alien crews for being reliable and predictable. The aliens appreciated predictability in species they considered inferior. How did they take it, Ambassador? Morrison asked as they walked through the ship's corridors toward the bridge. Exactly as we expected, Captain, Ryan replied. They are already planning how to divide up what we are leaving behind. Morrison nodded. The human diplomatic and military leadership had spent months planning for this moment. They knew that their withdrawal would be seen as an opportunity by the Council species rather than a loss. Humans had always been considered a minor member whose contributions were easily replaceable. The Aurora departed Kepler Station 20 minutes later, along with the rest of the human diplomatic convoy. As they jumped to faster than light speed toward the Sol system, Ryan looked back at the station's lights fading in the distance. The Council had watched humanity leave and said nothing because they believed humans had nothing important to offer. They would learn differently in time. But for now, silence was exactly what humanity needed. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood in her laboratory on Centauri Prime, watching her research team pack the last of their equipment into sealed containers. The xenobiology lab had taken 15 years to build and had produced some of the most advanced research on alien life forms that humans had ever conducted. Now, they were taking it all apart in less than 3 weeks. Her research partner, scientist Third Nalavan, watched the process with the quiet confusion that Altarians displayed when they encountered behavior they could not categorize. Nalavan had worked with Elena for 8 years and had come to respect her methods, even though she considered human research techniques primitive by Altarian standards. Dr. Rodriguez, Nalavan said in her carefully precise way of speaking, I must confess that I do not understand this decision. Your work on symbiotic organisms has been adequate by our measurements. Why would your species abandon research that has shown measurable progress? Elena smiled as she sealed another container of biological samples. The Altarians had a very specific way of giving compliments. When they said something was adequate, they meant it was actually quite good by their standards. When they said it showed measurable progress, they meant it was advancing faster than they had expected. Sometimes you have to leave one place to find something better somewhere else, Elena replied. She did not mention that she was taking detailed genetic samples of every organism she had studied during her time on Centauri Prime. She also did not mention the complete database of Altarian biological research methods that she had quietly copied over the years across the galaxy. Similar scenes were playing out as humans systematically removed themselves from Council space. Colonel Pete Barnes supervised the decommissioning of defensive installations that had been guarding minor trade routes for the past 20 years. The installations were small by galactic standards, but they had given humans valuable experience. In space-based military operations, the local Grenthuk commander, Sub-General Vexkar, seemed genuinely puzzled by the human withdrawal from the defensive positions. The humans had been reliable guards who asked for very little in return for their services. They had never complained about being assigned the least important and most boring defensive duties. Colonel Barnes, Vexkar said in his deep rumbling voice, your species has performed these duties with acceptable competence. Why do you abandon positions that provide your people with useful employment? Pete Barnes finished uploading the last of the tactical data from the station's computers to a portable storage device. The data included detailed scans of every Grenthuk ship that had passed through the area, complete records of their weapons capabilities, and analysis of their military communications protocols. Our people have other opportunities to pursue, Sub-General, Barnes replied politely. We appreciate the training experience these positions have provided. Vexkar made a sound that indicated mild approval. The Grenthuk respected species that sought to improve their military capabilities even if they considered human efforts largely hopeless. In Grenthuk thinking, humans were too small and weak to ever become serious warriors, but at least they tried. On the mining asteroid designated Alpha 7 in the Vega system, engineer Martha Singh directed her teams as they removed every piece of human-built equipment from the extraction facilities. The work was difficult and dangerous, but Martha had insisted that nothing be left behind that could give the aliens insights into human engineering methods. The Zephyrian corporate representative, Trade Director Vixelin, watched the removal process with the calculating interest of someone who was already planning how to maximize profits from the abandoned facilities. The Zephyrians had been hoping to acquire human mining operations for years, but had never offered reasonable terms for purchase. Engineer Singh, Vixelin said with the smooth politeness that Zephyrians used in all business dealings, surely your people do not need to remove the basic extraction equipment. Such devices would be difficult to transport and expensive to reinstall elsewhere. Martha finished disconnecting the power systems from the main drilling platform and loaded it onto the transport shuttle. The equipment looked crude and simple, but it incorporated several innovations that made it significantly more efficient than standard galactic mining technology. We prefer to take our own equipment with us, Martha replied. You understand how it is when you have grown used to working with familiar tools. Vixelin nodded in a way that suggested he thought humans were being inefficient, but that this was typical behavior for less advanced species. He did not realize that the familiar tools included manufacturing techniques that could produce materials stronger and lighter than anything in Zephyrian databases. The oceanic research stations on Nereid presented a different challenge for the human withdrawal. Marine biologist Kevin Park had to coordinate the evacuation of underwater facilities that had been operating continuously for 12 years. The research conducted there had given humans unprecedented knowledge of aquatic, alien life forms and deep ocean survival techniques. The native Neridians had found human diving capabilities amusing rather than impressive. Humans could hold their breath for only a few minutes without equipment, while Neridians could remain underwater for hours. What the Neridians had not noticed was that humans had been studying their biological adaptations and developing technology that could replicate their abilities. Chief Scientist Merendal of the Neridian Institute expressed polite regret at the human departure during the final transfer ceremonies. The humans had been useful for testing equipment in shallow water environments that were too dangerous for Neridian researchers. Your people have provided adequate assistance with our deep ocean studies, Merendal said in the gurgling voice that Neridians used when speaking in air rather than water. We will miss your basic metallurgy contributions to our equipment designs. Kevin smiled and nodded politely as he handed over the last of the official research records. He did not mention that human researchers had also developed new materials that could withstand pressure and corrosion far better than anything in Neridian technology. The basic metallurgy techniques had been carefully designed to appear primitive, while actually advancing human materials science by decades. Rear Admiral Claire Mason coordinated the massive logistics operation from her flagship, the heavy cruiser Titan. The ship was one of the largest in the human fleet. It had been specifically designed to handle complex cargo operations. Over the past 6 months, Mason had overseen the movement of personnel and equipment from dozens of facilities across Council space. The operation required precise timing to avoid causing disruptions that might prompt the Council to investigate too closely. The aliens expected human withdrawal to be somewhat disorganized since they considered humans poor at large-scale planning. This expectation provided useful cover for the systematic way humans were removing everything of value. Mason reviewed the daily progress reports from colony evacuation teams across 17 different star systems. The reports showed that humans were maintaining their scheduled timeline while successfully removing equipment and personnel that the aliens had never realized were strategically important. The most critical part of the evacuation involved the careful removal of data and research materials that humans had accumulated during 50 years of Council membership. Every computer core, every scientific database, every technical manual, and every tactical analysis that humans had legitimately acquired was being systematically transported back to human space. Captain Danny Foster commanded the final transport convoy departing from the outer edges of Council space. His ships carried the last human military advisors and technical specialists who had been working with alien forces on joint training exercises and equipment maintenance. The aliens had valued human technical expertise for routine maintenance work that they considered beneath their own people. What they had not realized was that this maintenance work had given humans detailed knowledge of alien technology that went far beyond simple repair procedures. Foster's convoy also carried something that no alien authority had bothered to inventory. Hidden within the standard cargo manifest were complete technical specifications for every piece of Council technology that humans had been allowed to examine. The specifications included not just the operating manuals but detailed analysis of design principles and manufacturing techniques. As the last human ships crossed the boundary markers that separated Council space from the unexplored regions beyond, Foster transmitted a final message to Council traffic control. The message was brief and polite, exactly what the aliens expected from the species they considered predictably formal. This is Captain Foster of Terran Transport Convoy 77 departing Council space with final personnel transfer, he transmitted. Course set for Sol System. We thank Council Traffic Control for assistance during our withdrawal period. The automated response came back immediately in standard galactic protocol language. Departure logged and acknowledged. Safe travels to your destination. No one at Council Traffic Control asked about return schedules or future contact procedures. No one expressed interest in maintaining diplomatic communications. As far as the Council was concerned, humanity was simply another minor species. 5 years had passed since the last human ship had departed Council space, and the galaxy had settled into its familiar patterns of trade disputes and territorial negotiations. The great powers continued their endless maneuvering for advantage, while smaller species struggled to maintain their independence or find powerful patrons to protect them. In the council chambers on Kepler Station, the topic of humanity arose exactly once during a routine administrative review. Councillor Threx of the Draconian Assembly was presenting his quarterly report on resource production in former human territories when he mentioned an unexpected problem. The mining operations on the Vega asteroids have shown decreased efficiency. Since the transfer to Zephyrian management, Threx reported in his dry mechanical voice, output has declined by 37% despite the installation of improved extraction equipment. General Carvaz of the Grenthek Empire shifted in his massive chair and made a dismissive gesture with one of his armored hands. Primitive. Species often develop narrow specializations that appear efficient but lack adaptability. The Zephyrians will optimize these operations once they have had time to implement proper procedures. Ambassador Quillen of the Zephyrian Federation looked uncomfortable at this criticism but said nothing. The truth was that Zephyrian engineers had been struggling to understand how human mining operations had achieved such high output levels with seemingly basic equipment. Every attempt to improve the processes had resulted in lower productivity and higher costs. The discussion moved on to other matters, and humanity was not mentioned again for the remainder of the session. This pattern had become typical over the 5 years since human withdrawal. Occasionally, some minor inefficiency or maintenance problem would be traced back to the transition from human management, but these issues were generally dismissed as temporary adjustment difficulties. What the council members did not know was that their conversations were being monitored from a location far beyond their sensor capabilities. Senator Grace Mitchell, now serving as Earth Secretary of Colonial Development, read the intercepted communications from her office in the New Geneva industrial complex on Luna. The office overlooked a manufacturing facility that had grown beyond anything that had existed during humanity's time in council space. The production lines below worked continuously, producing goods that incorporated technologies the council had never imagined possible. The entire complex hummed with activity that would have been impossible without the knowledge humans had quietly acquired during their 50 years of observation. Grace smiled as she read General Corvus's dismissive comments about human specialization. The Grenthek warrior had no idea how correct he was, though not in the way he intended. Humans had indeed developed specializations during their time in council space, but those specializations involved learning, adapting, and improving upon everything they observed. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had put her adequate research to remarkable use since returning to human space. The Terran Xenobiological Institute that she now directed had developed biological computing systems that processed information at speeds that would leave the Council's best artificial intelligence systems looking primitive by comparison. The symbiotic organisms that Elena had studied on Centauri Prime had become the foundation for biotechnology applications that seemed almost magical in their capabilities. Living computers that could adapt and evolve in real time, biological manufacturing systems that could produce complex materials from basic organic compounds, and medical treatments that used engineered symbiotic organisms to repair damage at the cellular level. Elena often worked late into the night in her new laboratory, surrounded by equipment that represented advances the Council would not achieve for decades. The research methods she had learned from the Altarians had provided the foundation, but human creativity and determination had pushed the technology far beyond anything her former colleagues could have imagined. Colonel Pete Barnes, now promoted to general and serving as head of System Defense Command, had transformed the lessons learned from Grenthek military technology into defensive capabilities that exceeded anything in the known galaxy. The boring guard duties that humans had performed for 20 years had provided invaluable opportunities to study alien weapons, tactics, and strategic thinking. The new defensive platforms that protected human space incorporated energy shield technology that could adapt to different types of attacks in real time. The weapon systems used principles derived from Grenthek plasma cannons, but refined to achieve power levels and accuracy that would make General Corvaz question his assumptions about human military capabilities. Barnes spent his days reviewing reports from defense installations that surrounded not just the Sol system but dozens of other star systems that humans had quietly colonized during their apparent exile. Each installation represented military technology that combined the best of Council science with human innovation and determination. Engineer Martha Singh had become the director of advanced manufacturing development and had overseen the creation of production techniques that made the old Zephyrian trade calculations look hopelessly outdated. The basic metallurgy that the aliens had dismissed had evolved into materials science that could produce substances with properties that violated several supposedly fundamental laws of physics. The manufacturing complexes that Martha supervised could produce goods with efficiency and quality that exceeded anything in Council space. The techniques combined human engineering principles with alien materials science to create production methods that were both incredibly fast and remarkably precise. Martha's teams had also solved resource limitation problems that still plagued Council worlds. By combining biological manufacturing techniques with advanced materials processing, they could produce almost anything they needed from relatively common raw materials. The scarcity economics that drove much of galactic trade policy simply did not apply to human space anymore. Meanwhile, exploration fleets under Admiral Lisa Grant's command pushed deeper into uncharted space using faster-than-light drives that incorporated human improvements to Grenthek propulsion technology. Each expedition brought back reports of new worlds, new resources, and new possibilities for human expansion. Admiral Grant now held the title of Supreme Commander of Human Space Forces and oversaw military operations that spanned dozens of star systems. The barely adequate local defense force that the Council remembered had evolved into a space navy that potentially rivaled the combined might of the Council's greatest powers. The exploration missions had discovered worlds rich in resources that the Council had never found, star systems with strategic importance that the aliens had never recognized, and regions of space where human colonies could develop without any interference from galactic politics. Captain Lucy Adams commanded one of the most advanced exploration vessels in the human fleet. The ship New Horizon had capabilities that would amaze Council engineers, but its most important function was mapping regions of space that lay far beyond the galactic rim where Council influence had never reached. Lucy's regular reports described worlds suitable for colonization, asteroid belts rich in rare minerals, and most importantly, no signs of Council monitoring or territorial claims. Humanity was building an empire in regions of space that the galactic powers had never bothered to explore. President William Hayes reviewed the quarterly progress reports with satisfaction that would have surprised the Council members who remembered him as a minor diplomatic functionary. The United Earth government had transformed from a barely recognized member state to the governing body of an interstellar civilization that was growing rapidly in both size and technological capability. The irony was not lost on President Hayes that humanity had achieved more in 5 years of independence than in 50 years of Council membership. The aliens had provided the knowledge and the motivation, but they had never understood what humans would do with the opportunities they were given. Back in Council space, trade disputes continued as they always had. The Altarians maneuvered for better access to rare mineral deposits. The Grenthek negotiated for strategic military positions. The Zephyrians calculated profit margins on interstellar commerce routes. None of them gave any thought to the species that had quietly withdrawn from their competition. The great powers of the galaxy had no idea that the civilization they had dismissed was building something unprecedented in the dark between stars. They had no knowledge of human technological advances that made their own achievements look primitive. They had no awareness that human space had expanded far beyond the Sol system into regions they had never explored, the Council's assumption that humanity had returned to their home system to focus on local development was completely wrong, but none of them bothered to investigate. As far as the galactic powers were concerned, humans were no longer relevant to galactic affairs and therefore not worth monitoring. This assumption would prove to be the most expensive mistake in galactic history, but for now the Council remained completely unaware that anything had changed. The silence from human space was interpreted as confirmation that the species had accepted their limitations and withdrawn from galactic affairs permanently. The aliens had no way of knowing. Captain Zixtar of the Vegan Trade Collective was having what humans would have called a very bad day. His cargo ship Prophet's Edge had been investigating unusual energy readings, reported by a deep space monitoring station when his sensors began detecting something that should not have existed. The readings showed massive artificial structures in what his navigation charts indicated was empty space. The structures were enormous, larger than anything in Council databases, and they were clearly the result of advanced engineering rather than natural phenomena. Most disturbing of all, they appeared to be actively operational rather than ancient ruins. Zixtar checked his sensor calibrations 3 times before accepting that the readings were accurate. The energy output from the structures suggested industrial activity on a scale that exceeded anything he had seen in 30 years of interstellar trade. The construction showed engineering principles that seemed familiar yet somehow different from known Council technology. This is Merchant Vessel Prophet's Edge transmitting priority data packet to Vegan Trade Authority. Zixtar spoke into his communication system. Request immediate analysis of attached sensor readings. Possible discovery of unknown civilization or lost colony requires investigation. The data packet that reached the Vegan Trade Authority 6 hours later caused immediate concern among the bureaucrats who reviewed routine merchant reports. The readings were forwarded to the Council's Xenotechnology Analysis Division within 12 hours and reached the desk of Dr. Veltar, the Council's Chief Technology Assessor. By the end of the week, Dr. Veltar had spent 40 years analyzing technological artifacts from newly discovered civilizations and abandoned installations. He had developed a reputation for being able to identify the origin and capabilities of unknown technology from limited sensor data. What he saw in the Prophet's Edge readings challenged everything he thought he knew about galactic civilization. The structures showed construction techniques that were recognizably derived from Council technology, but refined far beyond anything currently available. The energy signatures suggested manufacturing capabilities that could outproduce entire sectors of Council space. Most puzzling of all, the engineering philosophy behind the construction seemed to combine elements from multiple Council species in ways that should have been impossible. Councilor Vextara, Dr. Veltar transmitted to the Altarian Empire's Technology Bureau. I am forwarding analysis that requires immediate attention. The sensor data indicates technological development that exceeds our current understanding of engineering possibilities. The emergency session of the Council's Technology Assessment Committee took place 3 days later in a secure chamber deep within Kepler Station. Representatives from all major Council powers attended, along with military advisors and intelligence specialists. The meeting was classified at the highest levels because the implications of the sensor data were potentially destabilizing to galactic politics. Ambassador Quillen of the Zephyrian Federation was the first to voice the suspicion that was growing in everyone's minds. The manufacturing signatures, he said carefully, show efficiency patterns that are similar to techniques we observed in former human operations. General Corvaz made a sound that indicated extreme skepticism. Impossible. Human technology was primitive by our standards. They possessed no deep space construction capabilities and certainly nothing that could produce installations of this magnitude. Dr. Veltar activated the holographic display system and began presenting his detailed analysis. The 3-dimensional images showed massive orbital platforms, industrial complexes that dwarfed anything in Council space, and most unsettling of all, ships built to designs that appeared in no Council database. The technological genealogy is unmistakable, Dr. Veltar explained as the images rotated slowly in the center of the chamber. These devices evolved from systems that we know humans observed during their membership period. However, the level of advancement suggests development time and capabilities that contradict our assessments of human limitations. The debate that followed lasted for 6 hours and accomplished nothing except to deepen the mystery. Council intelligence services were ordered to investigate, but their capabilities were limited in regions beyond their traditional monitoring networks. The structures had been discovered in space that the Council had never bothered to explore. Because it appeared to contain no strategic resources, 3 weeks later, Deep Space Reconnaissance Drone FL-2847 transmitted images that ended all speculation about the origin of the mysterious installations. The drone had been dispatched to investigate shipping activity in the region and had captured detailed recordings of human vessels operating in the area. The images showed Commander Helen Price of the Earth vessel Odyssey directing traffic around one of the massive orbital platforms. Her ship demonstrated capabilities that violated several fundamental assumptions about human technology. The vessel performed maneuvers that should have been impossible with human-level understanding of physics and showed weapon systems that appeared more advanced than anything in Council arsenals. Intelligence. Analyst Kexran of the Draconian Assembly studied the drone footage with growing amazement. The human ships moved with precision and coordination that suggested tactical abilities far beyond what Council military advisors had observed during joint training exercises. The vessels themselves incorporated design elements that indicated technological advancement decades ahead of anything humans had possessed during their Council membership. The implications are clear, Kexran reported to his superiors. Either humans have made unprecedented technological leaps in 5 years, or they were concealing their true capabilities during their entire period of Council membership. The investigation that followed revealed the true scope of human expansion beyond their former territory. Reconnaissance missions discovered human colonies scattered across dozens of star systems, mining operations that extracted resources with efficiency that exceeded Council standards, and research installations that suggested scientific advancement in multiple fields. Most shocking of all was the discovery that human space had expanded far beyond the Sol system into regions that Council exploration missions had never reached. The humans had established colonies, trade routes, and defensive installations in star systems that the Council had not even known existed. Trade Director Mexelin of the Zephyrian Commercial Authority attempted to make contact with human merchant vessels to establish trading relationships. The response he received was polite but firm. Human authorities were not interested in resuming commercial relationships with Council species at this time. "We appreciate your interest," the human response stated, "but our current trade agreements with independent systems meet our requirements. We will consider Council trade proposals when our expansion priorities permit." The casual dismissal was more disturbing to Council leaders than outright hostility would have been. It suggested that humans no longer considered Council trade relationships necessary for their economic development. This was impossible according to galactic economic theory, which assumed that all developing civilizations needed access to established trade networks. General Corvaz finally admitted what other Council leaders were reluctant to acknowledge. "We may have seriously underestimated human capabilities," he announced during a closed session of the Military Affairs Committee. "Our intelligence assessments require complete revision." The reconnaissance reports that followed painted a picture of human space that challenged every assumption the Council had made about the species they had dismissed as primitive. Human manufacturing capabilities appeared to exceed Council standards in both quantity and quality. Their military showed tactical sophistication that suggested advanced strategic thinking. Their colonies demonstrated terraforming techniques that could transform marginal worlds into productive settlements. Most unsettling of all, analysis of human ship movements suggested that their expansion was continuing at an accelerating pace. New colonies appeared regularly, trade routes expanded into previously unexplored regions, and defensive installations were established in strategic locations that showed sophisticated understanding of galactic geography. Counselor Threx of the Draconian Assembly summarized the situation in terms that made every council member uncomfortable. We are facing the possibility that a species we classified as primitive has developed capabilities that rival or exceed our own major powers. This situation has no precedent in galactic history. The question that haunted every council leader was how such dramatic advancement had been possible in such a short time. The answer, when intelligence analysis finally provided it, was both simple and terrifying. Humans had not advanced rapidly after leaving council space. They had been concealing their true capabilities during their entire period of membership. Evidence mounted that humans had been systematically studying council technology, tactics, and strategic thinking while appearing to be primitive clients. Every assignment they had been given, every joint operation they had participated in, every research project they had been allowed to observe, had been carefully analyzed and improved upon. The species that the Council had dismissed as barely adequate had been conducting the most successful intelligence. 10 years after humanity's quiet departure from Council space, the communication systems at Kepler Station received a transmission that made the duty officer check his equipment twice before forwarding the message to his supervisors. The signal originated from just outside the station's sensor range and carried identification codes that had not been used in a decade. Galactic Council Traffic Control. This is Admiral Ryan Clark of the Terran Federation Diplomatic Corps requesting permission to dock for formal discussions. The message stated in clear galactic standard language. We have a delegation prepared to present our credentials to the Council. The duty officer, a young Altarian named Kexival, had never heard of Admiral Ryan Clark, but the computer records showed that someone with that name had served as humanity's ambassador during their council membership. However, the records indicated that Ryan Clark had been a civilian diplomat, not a military officer. Station Commander Nexler of the Zephyrian Federation reviewed the transmission request with growing confusion. The ship identification codes were clearly human in origin, but the vessel itself was not appearing on any of their sensor displays. Either the humans were using some kind of advanced stealth technology or their ship was significantly more sophisticated than anything in Council databases. Grant docking permission to Base 7, Commander Nexler decided after consulting with his staff. Alert Council security and prepare for a formal diplomatic reception. This situation requires careful handling. The ship that approached Kepler Station 30 minutes later challenged every assumption that Council engineers had made about human technological capabilities. The vessel identified itself as the TFS Constitution and appeared to be roughly the size of a Council heavy cruiser, but its design incorporated technologies that made experienced spaceship crews question their understanding of physics. The hull seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal while maintaining perfect structural integrity. Energy readings suggested power generation that exceeded some planetary electrical grids. Most unsettling of all, the ship appeared to be using propulsion systems that produced no detectable radiation signature, while achieving acceleration rates that should have been impossible. Chief Engineer Lixstar of Kepler Station's Maintenance Division watched the Constitution dock with professional fascination and growing concern. The ship's docking procedures were flawless, but the technology it displayed during approach suggested engineering capabilities that surpassed anything in Council space. Commander Nexler, Lixstar reported over the station's communication system, the human vessel is using docking systems that are at least 50 years more advanced than our own equipment. I recommend that we treat this as a potential first contact situation rather than a routine diplomatic visit. The delegation that disembarked from the Constitution carried themselves with confidence that had been completely absent during humanity's previous council membership. Admiral Ryan Clark still looked recognizably human, but his bearing suggested someone who had achieved significant military accomplishments since his diplomatic service. President William Hayes led the delegation with the quiet authority of someone who commanded resources that rivaled those of major galactic powers. His simple diplomatic uniform carried decorations that indicated achievements in areas the Council had never associated with human capabilities. Dr. Elena Rodriguez accompanied the delegation as scientific advisor, wearing credentials that identified her as director of the Terran Xenobiological Institute. General Pete Barnes served as military liaison, his decorations suggesting combat experience and strategic victories that had not appeared in any Council intelligence reports. The full Council session that convened to receive the human delegation was the first time in 3 years that every major power had sent their highest-ranking representatives. The emergency nature of the meeting was not lost on anyone present. Humanity's return was clearly not a routine diplomatic visit. Counselor Vextara of the Altarian Empire studied the human delegation with all 4 of her eyes focused intently on their equipment and bearing. The humans displayed technological sophistication that seemed to exceed Council standards while maintaining the polite, diplomatic protocols that characterized their previous membership. General Corvaz of the Grenthek Empire appeared visibly uncomfortable as he reviewed intelligence reports about human military capabilities that had been discovered over the past year. The species he had dismissed as too weak for serious military service now commanded space forces that potentially rivaled his own empire's fleet strength. Admiral Clark approached the central podium with the same measured dignity he had displayed during humanity's withdrawal announcement 10 years earlier. The chamber fell silent as representatives from across the galaxy focused their attention on what the humans had returned to say. Distinguished members of the Galactic Council, Admiral Clark began. Using the traditional formal opening, the Terran Federation requests the honor of presenting our application for recognition as a sovereign galactic power with full membership rights and responsibilities. The silence that followed was not the indifference that had greeted humanity's departure announcement. This was the shocked quiet of political leaders who suddenly realized that the balance of galactic power had shifted while they were not paying attention. President Hayes stepped forward to address the Council directly. We return not as supplicants seeking the protection and guidance of more advanced civilizations, but as equals prepared to contribute to galactic security and prosperity. The formal presentation that followed systematically dismantled every assumption the Council had maintained about human limitations. Trade figures showed an economy that had grown exponentially during their absence. Military assessments revealed defensive capabilities that would make any invasion of human space prohibitively expensive for any potential aggressor. Scientific achievements demonstrated breakthroughs in biotechnology, materials science, and space propulsion that represented advances the Council had considered theoretically impossible. The humans presented star charts showing territorial expansion into regions the Council had never successfully explored. Dr. Rodriguez presented research findings that made several Council scientists question their fundamental understanding of biology and physics. Her work on symbiotic organisms had produced computational systems that exceeded the capabilities of the galaxy's most advanced artificial intelligence networks. General Barnes outlined human military capabilities with matter-of-fact precision. That made it clear humanity was no longer dependent on Council protection for their security. The defensive installations that protected human space incorporated shield technology that could adapt to multiple attack types simultaneously. President Hayes concluded the presentation with an offer that reflected humanity's transformed position in galactic affairs. The Terran Federation proposes mutual defense agreements that would strengthen galactic security, trade partnerships that would benefit all participants, and research collaborations that would advance scientific knowledge for every member species. The most significant aspect of the human proposal was what it did not include. There was no request for technology transfers, no appeal for protection from hostile forces, and no indication that humanity needed anything from the Council other than recognition of their sovereign status. Councillor Vextara asked the question that had haunted Council leadership since the discovery of human expansion. How long have your people possessed these capabilities? President Hayes smiled with the patience of someone who had anticipated this question for years. Capability and opportunity are different things, Counselor. We have always possessed the ability to learn and adapt. Our time in Council space provided us with excellent educational opportunities. The diplomatic language was polite, but the message was clear. Humanity had been studying and learning during their entire period of Council membership, while the aliens assumed they were witnessing primitive attempts at technological development. Ambassador Quillen of the Zephyrian Federation attempted to negotiate trading agreements that would give Council species access to human technology. President Hayes politely indicated that such arrangements would need to be based on mutual benefit rather than the previous relationship where humans provided labor and resources in exchange for obsolete technology, the vote to grant humanity recognition as a sovereign galactic power was unanimous, though not because the Council had suddenly developed respect for human potential. The alternative of treating as enemies a species that had quietly become more powerful than any single Council member was simply too dangerous to consider. General Corvaz cast his vote with the grim acknowledgement of a military commander who understood that humanity now possessed sufficient strength to defend their independence regardless of Council recognition. The practical reality was that humans no longer needed Council permission for anything they chose to do. Admiral Clark concluded the session with a statement that carried undertones the Council was only beginning to understand. The Terran Federation looks forward to productive relationships with all members of the galactic community. We believe that cooperation and mutual respect will benefit everyone involved. The Constitution departed Kepler Station TH.